Welcome to MilSpouse Matters, the podcast dedicated to encouraging military spouses. I'm your host, Jen McDonald, and I was a military spouse for nearly 30 years until my husband's retirement. I'm now the mom of 4 young adults, including 1 active duty son. I also wrote the book, You Are Not Alone, Encouragement for the Heart of a Military Spouse. Through my experiences, I came to believe that we're only stronger together. Whatever life is throwing your way as a military spouse, let's talk about it. So, hey, everybody, and welcome to this episode. Today, we're going to be talking about some hot topics, finances and budgeting as a military family, along with other money issues with my amazing guest, Kate Horrell. Here is a little bit about Kate. She's an accredited financial counselor who's been working with military and veteran families for 15 years. She is also the spouse of a recently retired sailor. She's navigated PCS moves, landlording, TRICARE, college funding, a special needs kid, and their family's transition to civilian life. You can learn more about Kate at her website, Kate Horrell, HORRELL.com, as well as all the socials, which we will of course, link in the show notes. And make sure and keep listening so you can hear all about the awesome giveaway that Kate is so generously providing. So welcome, Kate. I am so excited for you to be sharing some of your financial expertise today.
I'm really excited to be here with you.
Yay. So I gave your part of your impressive resume, but please, if you would, take a moment and share your background as a military spouse and family, and then we'll talk a little bit about how you got into the financial world.
Yeah, so my husband and I have just celebrated our 30-year anniversary, which means that maybe we are old. We have 4 young adult children who we appear to have successfully navigated through military life and are finding their places in the grown-up world. So that's pretty much me in a nutshell personally. Professionally is a whole different story.
I feel like we have parallel lives family-wise. We have kids in the same era. How long has your husband been retired?
About almost 2 years.
Okay. So it's still pretty new.
Oh, yeah. We're still figuring this out.
Oh, well, we're here 5 years later, and I hate to break it to you. It's just a work in progress. We'll talk more about that on another episode. That will be a great topic. But for sure, how did you get into the financial world, and talk a little bit about what you do with supporting military families as far as finances go?
Yeah, so it was just a really lucky combination of personal and professional interests. Like many families, when we got married, neither my husband or I knew anything about money. We both brought debt to our marriage, and we pretty rapidly thought, well, if we're married, that must mean we're grown-ups and we need to get a handle on this situation. He was in a school and I had quit my job, so I was the person who had the free time to figure this out. I went to the library, I read books, I asked everybody I knew. I started getting pretty smart about our own money. And then, like many military spouses, I've reinvented myself a few times over the years. One duty station, I ended up working in the servicing department of a local mortgage bank. Part of my job was to help people stay out of foreclosure. And in doing so, I got some really intimate looks into how they managed their money. And I was utterly fascinated. And so from there, I continued my education. I got some tax training, and then I was fortunate to be accepted into the FINRA Fellowship for the Accredited Financial Counselor Program. And
that's awesome.
At a similar time, I fell into a job writing about money for military families. So here's where I am.
Just kind of all came together. Well, it sounds like you learned from what not to do from some of your work, it sounds like. We'll talk
and some
more
of
about
my
that.
Personal life.
Yeah. Well, and I remember as a brand new stay-at-home mom, and my husband was a young enlisted guy, and he came home one day, and one of his supervisors was also a financial counselor, and he said, we need to put money in an investment. I was like, what money? Number one. And I had just stopped working, and he was like, we could surely afford $50 a month. And I just remember at that time, that was a lot of money out of our budget. And
Yes.
I said, okay, I guess I'll trust you and I'll trust this person that's obviously smarter about finances than I am. And that was a long time ago. And I'm so glad we did because it just seemed like it wasn't really going to do much, but of course it does.
It does. When we first started contributing to a thrift savings plan, I think it was $50 a month
Yeah.
that I thought we could somehow still be able to afford to buy groceries if
Hmm.
we, contributed that $50 a month. And with every um, annual pay raise and every promotion and every raise for time and service, we just bumped it up a little bit and bumped it up a little bit. And now that's one of the reasons that we have the flexibility that we do
Yeah.
because we started with that $50 a month.
Yeah. You just may not comprehend how big of a difference that can make over the course of a couple of decades. Absolutely.
Yep.
Well, we will be taking some listener questions that we asked for on social media, and I know that we'll be covering some topics about budgeting. But before that, can you kind of give us some budgeting basics in a nutshell? I know that's a very big topic to wrap your arms around, but especially for a young military family who may just be starting to think about how to stay within a budget, how to make a budget, if you can just give like some of your top tips.
So there's sort of two aspects to budgeting. One of them is knowing where you are in the big picture. What do you owe? What do you own? That's called your net worth. The other one is really being familiar with your monthly income and your monthly expenses. And that's more what we think of as budgeting or having a spending plan. I like the term spending plan because for me, that's a very forward-looking thing. Like you,
Mm-hmm.
when we were first married, I knew every penny that was going to come in and I had planned out where it was going to go before my husband got paid. And there's a little danger in like quote unquote spending money before you have it, but we weren't spending it. We were just
Yeah.
creating a structure for where every dollar was going to go. Um, for us and for many families, an important part of this was having a shared sort of set of rules that we both agreed to.
Mm-hmm.
That we were both comfortable, and that prevented some of the conflicts that I run into where one spouse has one set of rules in their head and another spouse has a different set of rules in their head. So that's super key to having any spending plan is for everybody who's on the spending plan to actually believe in it.
That is a challenge. Well, and I like the thought of just you're allocating your money and it's not like an outside budget. It's you making those decisions. And that probably looks very different for every family other than, housing and cars. But beyond that, it can have a lot of flexibility.
It really does. And it's if it's done, I don't want to say done well because there's no really wrong way to do it, but it should be a very powerful thing. Like you are empowered to tell your money where to go rather than running around all month having your money tell you what you can and cannot do.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, what about some tips, especially for military families where they're living on one income, whether by choice or not, because that changes things. And I think too, for spouses that maybe have had to stop working or choose to stay home, you kind of lose some feeling of power. So maybe if I'm asking several questions in one, how to manage that when you're just living on the service member's income, if you have any experience or advice.
Yeah, I think that stay-at-home parents have really a tremendous amount of power over how their money gets spent on a day-to-day basis. When you're caught up in having two jobs, it really sometimes just is like, how can we survive? How are we going to make sure we eat tonight? And money becomes not as you aren't as thoughtful about your money as maybe you could be. But when you're a stay-at-home parent, even when I had 4 little kids, I still had time to be thoughtful about our money and I would keep better track of it.
Mm-hmm.
We did not eat out really at all when I was a stay-at-home parent, in part because it wasn't in our budget, but it wasn't in our budget because it wasn't a priority. And we
Mm-hmm.
had other choices because I could cook dinner. I could cook lunch. In addition, if you're staying at home, you could control some other costs. You can really take the time to negotiate like your cable bill or
Mm-hmm.
your cell phone bill. You can shop for that better price. You can maybe buy your clothes at the thrift store or
Mm-hmm.
dare I say, learn how to mend. Maybe you don't send uniforms out to the cleaner to get pressed. Maybe somebody irons them at home.
Yeah.
And the huge thing about being a stay-at-home parent that I think a lot of people underestimate, and you will appreciate this with a large family, is childcare is crazy expensive.
Yeah, for sure.
And if you take all of the costs of working, including childcare, so often you're not really actually making any more money by working outside the home.
Mm-hmm. Agree. And I did learn to sew. It's the craziest thing to look back on now, but I remember there was a period I had more time than money. And so I would sew like little pajamas and just it kind of became a hobby where I tried different things, and my kids were little enough they didn't care, what I was dressing them in, easy little skirts with like elastic waists, and they were some of their favorite clothes. But one thing we did to save money back then was Steve came home and he said, "I think you could cut my hair," because he would just do that buzz. And I mean, the first couple of times were awful. I mean, it looked like he'd had his hair cut at home. So then I read the little pamphlet and kind of looked up some stuff to figure out how to do it. So here we are. We're in our 50s now, and he still prefers me to cut his hair. And I go, if I had known this money saving thing we did 30 years ago, I would still be doing.
I could never convince my Steve to let me cut his hair, but he was always willing to take leftovers to work. So when we made dinner every night, we just made a little extra, and we had special dishes that were lunch dishes, we called them. And after dinner, leftovers went in a lunch dish, went in the freezer. He doesn't like to eat the same thing the next day, but we would have 3 or 4 dishes in the freezer. So he would just grab a dish every morning on the way out the door. And I can't even be able to calculate how much money he has saved us.
Mm-hmm.
Just because I was able to cook, and then he was able to eat that meal again for lunch a little later in the week.
And these all seem like such little things, but that, making your coffee at home, learning how to cut hair, or like you said, sew men clothes, just all those little things, they may not seem like a lot, but if you added up the cost of lunch out several times a week, even if they just took their lunch a couple of times a week, the savings over time just multiply.
Both of those are 2 great examples of things that seem like so small, but even now we both work from home, and I have a little drive-through habit, and I spend far too much money. I get in the car and I'm like, oh, I might just want some French fries. And it adds up. And you stretch that over a whole lifetime, it adds up a lot.
Yeah, probably don't go add that up, Kate.
Probably won't.
Well, and aside from sticking to a budget, and we kind of touched on investing or saving, it can seem really challenging to save or invest. So if somebody's just starting out or even has gotten a little bit saved up, what are some ways you recommend for them to keep going with that habit, or something maybe they hadn't thought about?
This is a really personal question for me, because we did so well with our money for many years, and then we just kind of let it slide for this chunk of years. We lost our focus. And one of the reasons was we had met our financial goal and we didn't create a new one. We had a goal that we wanted to be debt free before we had our first child, and we wanted to have our first child hopefully at about 5 years of marriage. We met that goal like 3 months before our first child was born, and we didn't make a new goal. And so for several years, our money just kind of floated. We were still good. We still had money going into TSP and IRAs that happened automatically, so we couldn't mess that up. But we were very unfocused and wasted a lot of money for several years, until my husband came to me and said, what if I didn't want to work after I got out of the military? And suddenly we had a very big goal, right? And
that is a big goal.
It was, but for 15 years that sustained us. That was our sole mission, was to make sure that we paid off all our debt and that we had some sort of plan, including me working was part of that plan. So that when he retired, if he didn't want to work, he didn't have to.
Okay.
So I think goals are essential, but then being a shared goal is also essential, because not every family agrees on the same thing. Yeah. Maybe one partner really wants to go on a trip, and the other partner really wants to replace their car. Like, where can you find a common ground between those two things? Can you have 2 goals at the same time? Sure. you can. Or, can you say, well, the old car's really probably going to last another 3 years. So let's do the trip first and then we'll do the car, or whatever the case may be.
Mhm. So speaking of cars, what do you think about this idea of paying in cash versus financing? That was not on my list I sent you. It just came to me thinking
That's
about,
fine.
I have a husband that's very into paying cash and he hates paying interest on things that we don't have to pay interest on. And I go back and forth, like, is it better to help with your credit score, or is it better to just go be like, here's the money? If you have it, if you're able to do that and you've saved for that goal, which we did repeatedly. So I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
I don't think there's a single right answer to that question. We have done both. I do find sometimes, depending on your stage in life, that having that car payment really can be a little bit of an anchor that drags you down,
Mm-hmm.
in the sense that it doesn't give you flexibility. And car payments nowadays are enormous.
Yeah.
We actually financed our last car because there wasn't a Navy Federal close enough for us to get a check. And we thought, oh, we'll just finance it with the dealership and we'll just pay it off. And then the interest rates went way up. So we have a very low rate on our car loan, and we're making more money in our bank account than we are paying on our car loan. So we actually have decided not to pay it off, which surprised me. But that's $550 a month that I have owe somebody, and I have the money set aside, but it really is like a weight on your monthly finances.
Yeah.
Sometimes you don't have any choice, particularly when you're young. Like, you may get stationed, you may think, I don't need a car. I'm a single service member and I live in the barracks and I walk to work. And then you get transferred to Fort Bragg and you don't have a car savings account and you can't get to your job because Fort Bragg is like the size of Canada. And you have to go buy a car, and a loan is probably going to be the way that you make that happen.
Mm-hmm.
In those situations, there are several rules of thumb, right? Don't get a loan don't buy a car that's more than a year's salary is one of the rules of thumb. Don't get a loan that's more than 10% of your take-home income. Don't get a loan that you can't pay off in 3 years. There are 100 different ways you can approach this, but they all boil down to, just because you have to borrow money, don't buy something you can't afford. Right. That's easy to do, right? You go into the dealer and they say, well, how much can you afford every month? You don't ask you how much money you want to spend. You need to figure that out. Maybe go see the personal financial counselor on base, do the math, and be really aware of realistically what price point is reasonable for the car, not for the payment.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I agree, because they're going to try to tell you what they think you can afford, and that may not jive with what number you've come up with.
No, and when I bought my first car, I knew nothing about this. I just knew that I could afford $200 a month, which was a lot of money back then.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, if they didn't get me in a car, that was $214 a month. And I probably didn't need to spend that much money on the car, but I didn't have any idea that there was another way to figure this out.
Yeah. Well, as far as car payments and other bills and budgeting, what are some of the most common mistakes that you've seen, especially with military families, when it comes to planning that budget or spending plan and sticking to it?
I had an answer prepared to this question, but since we've been talking about cars, maybe I've changed my answer. First thing was what we were just talking about, was having some sort of shared vision if there's more than one adult in your family, because it's not really a mistake in that you did something wrong. It's more that you failed to do something right. Mm-hmm. And that will bog you down every time. The other thing is, particularly from military families, is to assume that your budget's going to look the same from year to year. Right. You may absolutely be able to afford that car payment while you're stationed where you're stationed right now, based upon how much your housing is, and maybe you're getting sub pay or something, and maybe your spouse has a job, or childcare is really cheap, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
You get PCOS orders, and your whole financial plan just got shaken up.
Mm-hmm.
And now that expense isn't actually in your budget anymore, but you got a 5-year car loan, you got to keep paying it.
Yeah.
So that is a big thing for military families, particularly because our circumstances do change so frequently. Not just PCS moves, but maybe you're somehow maintaining 2 jobs and you have kids and a spouse deploys, and suddenly that working full time is just no longer happening for you.
Right.
Or your landlord decides they're going to sell your house at the end of your lease and you end up having to move into someplace way more expensive than what you've been paying previously.
Yeah. Or the perfect storm of you had, overseas housing allowance or COLA, and then hazardous duty pay where they were deployed, and then you moved someplace like that, don't work, and all of those allowances go away. Oof. That's a
Yeah.
big, big change.
Yes, very much so.
Totally hypothetical.
Never happened to anybody here.
Yeah. Well, I have so many other questions for you, and I think I'm going to have to save those for another episode because I would love to go into like the thrift savings plan, survivor's benefit, and more. But I want to talk about your brand new resource and make sure we have time to get to listeners' questions. So Kate has put together the Everything You Need binder. So I'm going to let Kate tell us more about that because she's just launched this incredible resource.
Thanks. I'm really excited. It has taken me about 3 years to finish this product. So it's kind of like giving birth, just a very, very, very long pregnancy. And like having written books. Yep. So this all started, we had 2 incidents in our family. One time, in true Navy fashion, we moved to a new duty station in September of 2001, which you guys might remember was an epic year. And we had been in our new house. We had our household goods delivered on September 10th. September 11th happened.
Oh my gosh.
And I had 3 little teeny tiny kids, and my husband's had to go deploy because they do. And he gets on his ship, and the ship is not even in the ocean yet. And the infant falls and needs to, like, they were talking about helicoptering her.
Oh my.
And so I show up on my next door neighbor's front doorstep. We've lived here for several days with an unconscious infant and the ambulance in the street. And I'm like, there are other kids in my house.
Oh my.
And I just left. And they were 3 and 1, I think. Thank goodness this was a good person.
Wow.
She was not upset about the state of my home, but I just thought wow, there's got to be a better way to do this. If I just could have said, there's kids in my house and there's a purple binder on the shelf in the kitchen, she would have known how to call my mother. She would have known how to put my kids to bed. She would have known how to turn off the alarm to my house when it started going off. And so I gradually started gathering this information, but I was doing a lousy job of it because I didn't really know what I was trying to gather. So I bought a commercial binder, called an In Case of Emergency binder, and I started filling it out. It was great. I've given one to my mother and my mother-in-law and my aunt, but it didn't reflect my life as a military family. It didn't have anything about a family care plan. It didn't have anything about how to send a Red Cross message or place to store all of my old addresses that I always forget, because apparently your Amazon account is not a good place to store your old addresses.
Wait, what?
So I started taking this binder and I thought, I bet I can do this better for myself. So I just started from scratch and I created this very comprehensive, not just in case of emergency, but really if you have an unexpected babysitter, do they know what stuffed animal your kid needs to go to sleep at night? Or where is the water shut off to your house? Or if your parents, if you have an appendicitis and your parents need to come, do they know how to navigate a drop-off line at your kid's preschool? Yeah. Probably not. Those things are terrifying. But then it does get into more serious issues. What type of benefits would be available for survivors? What plans you have for your family in the long term. And I also look at it as a really good financial tool because there's a lot of financial information you can gather there For a lot of people, this is a great way to look at their finances without feeling like they're looking at their finances. You're really just listing like, here's our income and expenses. So if somebody else needed to pay my bills next month, they would know how to do it. Gathering all that information is super valuable and
Yes.
can help you move forward.
And it's things that I got a chance to look at. I think it's just great. It's laid out so clearly and simply, and it's things that you might not even think of. Kate's done the thinking for you. So you just have to fill it in. And I'll tell you, Kate, when I had COVID, it was a little bit dramatic because I got very, very, very ill. And this was in the early days of COVID, and I have asthma. And so I had this whole thought of, I kept worrying, like, what's going to happen? How am I going to cope with this? And so I ended up staying in my guest room, and I had this whole thing. I woke up one day in a sweat. I mean, I was sick for like 12 days where I couldn't even get out of bed. And I thought, does Anna know where all her important papers are? A daughter that still lives at home. So I got up and I got on my laptop and I got every password and wrote it all down, wrote down where all our accounts were, wrote down where the marriage certificates and, birth certificates were, because I had never done that. And so put it all in an envelope, put it away. I had told, and like in my fevered state, I'm all relieved. I go back to sleep. So I completely forgot about it. When I recovered, I was going through my desk and I find this envelope. And I had written on it, it looked like a first grader. Like every word was capitalized and it said, important stuff if anything happens to me.
That's it, isn't it?
And I showed my daughter and she just was like, are you kidding me? But I just said, just to get it out of my brain and write it down in that haphazard way, just so someone knew, because you have things on your computer, you have things, paperwork, you have things scattered around. If you're a military family, you might not even know where some of those important things are, even to the point of you talking about like how your kids go to bed, where would you have all that? So I think it's just such a godsend for a military family to just have that in a centralized location, kind of like a brain,
It is. And I call it everything you need. It is, I should say, there's nothing deployment specific in there and there's nothing PCS specific in there. But if this binder is put together, you're ready for a deployment anyway.
Yeah.
And really, you just stick a few more PCS things in there rather than trying to gather your life when it's time for someone to deploy or someone to PCS. It's also really good if you have older parents who are veteran family members.
Mm-hmm.
We had a health scare with one of our older family members one time, and she couldn't talk for a couple days. And this is so silly, but it was the end of the year, and we didn't know if she'd paid her property taxes, and we didn't know how to find out if she'd paid her property taxes. And the county wouldn't talk to us because we weren't her.
Right.
And it made us realize, wow, we have a huge amount of knowledge that we don't know about our parents either.
Mm-hmm.
That if they're unavailable to answer questions for us, we need to know where to find this information.
And it's better than an envelope labeled important stuff you need to know that could just get accidentally thrown away, honestly, because
I don't know. I think that was a good start.
Well,
you may have forgotten things like, that there's a little switch that runs our HVAC system. And if one of the kids accidentally flips it, you're going to wake up in the middle of the night and it's going to be 42 degrees in your house.
Yeah.
Not that that's ever happened to me.
Oh my goodness. And it's all downloadable, right? It's not a physical product. If people want it, they just go to your site and they can just instantly get it. Correct?
Yes. Once you make the purchase, you get a link and you can download it up to 5 times. At some point in the future, I'm working with the designer to make it so you can fill out the PDF on your computer. Mm-hmm. And when I do that, everybody who's purchased it now will get a copy of that as well. But for right now, you download it. I set it up very carefully so you don't have to print the pages you don't need. Say you don't have pets, you don't need to print the pet pages. Mm-hmm. And my designer and I put a lot of effort into making it very low ink. My first rendition was very cutesy and used literally $100 worth of ink to print. And I said, that's not going to work for that's not what I want to do to my readers. So
how many pages is it?
The whole document is 126 pages.
It's incredible. Like, I can't overstate that. It's not just like a little checklist. It's very, very thorough. It's got it all laid out for you to fill in. And Kate has recently launched that. And we kind of alluded to this giveaway. So if you want to talk about that, Kate.
Sure. So Jen's got apparently a really good system for running a giveaway, because this is not my area of expertise, but I'm giving away a copy of the binder to one of the listeners of the show. I'm really excited to do that. And you'll just when we get this all sorted out and someone wins, I'll send you a link and you can let us know what you think.
Yes. Thank you so much for doing that, Kate. And we will be doing that primarily on Instagram. So listeners, the week this comes out, be looking for it. I will post it on my feed and in my stories, so you cannot miss it. So just find me at Spouse Matters on Instagram and you'll find out all about the giveaway there. So we asked for some listener questions on Instagram, speaking of, and we chose a few for Kate to answer today. I think she's kind of touched on a couple of them, but I thought this could be really fun to just have an opportunity to pick her brain and learn from her experience and expertise. So Kate, are you ready?
I am ready.
So the first question is from Corey from @ajoyfulmillspouse on Instagram. And she asked, after maxing out retirement and Roth accounts, what's next?
Great question. I'm going to start with a little terminology review. For all those of you out there who don't do this every day, the term Roth is a tax treatment. It's not a type of account. So every retirement savings account has a tax type. It's either a Roth or a traditional type, but it's a different kind of account. I mean, it has an account type. I suspect that Corey, you said Corey, right?
Yes.
Means a Roth IRA. You might also have a Roth TSP account, or you might have a traditional IRA, or you might have a traditional TSP. You might have a traditional 401k if you have a civilian employer. So Roth and traditional just are like flavors of different kinds of accounts. But back to the actual question. Even before I maxed out my retirement in Roth, I'd make sure that you have a solid emergency fund. And that might be more than you think. I would also talk about transition funds, and they need to be separate from emergency funds. In my perfect dream world, everybody would start their transition fund while they were in basic military training. Maybe for a single service member whose plan after they leave the military is to move home and go to school on the GI Bill. Maybe it's $500 to buy books that first semester. But when you've been doing this for a really long time, and maybe you get out at 20 or 25 or 30 years and you have a huge mortgage and you have kids in college, you may need many $1,000s to get through transition.
More than you think you're going to need.
More than you think that you are going to need. We had a transition fund that was way too big and we could possibly never use, and we used all of it. So the thing about transition funds is if you start when you're that single service member and you save that $500, and then maybe you buy a car. So now you need to be able to cover a car payment. Now maybe your transition fund is $1,500, and you just chunk it up as your life gets more expensive. It's not crazy overwhelming that you drop retirement papers and you suddenly calculate you need $65,000 when you retire in a year, because that's just too much.
Yeah.
So, you've done all those things. Then I would start thinking about pre-planning future spending. Are you going to need a car? Do you have a car savings account? Do you have savings accounts for kids to help pay for college or weddings? Do you really want to go to Ireland for the Navy Notre Dame game for your 30th wedding anniversary? Well, you're going to need some money for that. Or
that seems very specific.
It was actually my husband's retirement present. Close enough. Once you've done all those things, if you really are wanting to save more, you can always save in, taxable brokerage accounts, or you could figure out some creative ways to save in different retirement accounts. When I first started my small business, I created a solo 401k for my business money, and that allows me to save more than what goes into TSP and our IRAs. And, have a little fun along the way. If you're maxing out your retirement accounts, There's a little bit more to life than money.
It's time to go on a trip.
Maybe.
Or whatever you like doing. Yes.
Yep.
So those are great tips. I'm sitting here scribbling down with my business. Maybe I need to do some different stuff.
We can talk about that later.
Yeah. So Shelby from @MomLife Military Wife says, can you suggest tips for getting out of debt? And I feel like that could be a whole episode, but if you want to give us like your top.
Oh yeah. Top 3 tips.
Yeah.
Figure out what motivates you. I really like visual charts. Put a chart on my refrigerator if I have a financial goal, because I'm in my refrigerator 100 times a day. And it says something like pay off car or save for trip to Ireland. And I put blocks on it that are some sort of manageable amount of money. And whenever I save that $100 or I pay $300 off on the car, I get to X off that block. And that makes me really excited. And there are free printables on the internet for everything you could imagine. And they're really clever and much better than my little charts. The other thing is to track your spending. Most people say, I know exactly where I spend my money. But if you spend a month writing down every cent you spend, I guarantee you will have some surprises. Whether it's that French fry habit, or maybe you didn't realize how much money you were spending on haircuts, or how much money you were spending on uniform parts, because those things are expensive.
Yeah.
And even if you're just buying a belt here and some new socks there, you can spend a lot of money on uniforms over a year. So tracking your money is the second key thing that I would say to get out of debt. And then again, it's back to that vision. What would it take for you to meet whatever goal is in your head? And in a lot of cases, that's, maybe we can really cut back on food, or maybe we can really cut back on entertainment. I will throw out a little quick pro tip in there. Sometimes all you need to do is cut back for a little bit. Maybe you cut back your entertainment budget to absolutely zero every other month for a year.
Yeah.
Like not zero forever, not zero for 10 years, zero for 3 months, or zero this month.
That's very
just
doable.
Divert that money. It's a lot more doable. Or to really slash your grocery budget 1 month and make a huge effort to eat the things that are already in your house. In my case, if I cut my grocery budget in half for a month, that would be $400 that I could put to some other purpose.
And I think if you have one partner that's a little more austere and one that's a little bit more fun loving, I have no idea what that's like. That helps you kind of meet in the middle, because my husband would be like, we're not spending money on anything fun, blah, blah, blah. And he'd be fine with that. And I was like, that sounds awful, So if you can just say, all right, we will cut back, but we're going to only eat out this many times, or whatever the little splurge you have, coming to that point in the middle. Nobody's asking my advice, but this is just my experience. That helped
Good advice.
us.
Yeah. The other
and then
thing
there's
is
less resentment.
I think no matter where you are, paying off debt, or if you've got all the money in the world, both of the adults, if you're in a relationship, should have some money that they're not accountable to each other for.
Yeah.
And when we first got married, it was $20 a paycheck we each got. But if I wanted to go get my French fries, I didn't have to account for that. If my husband wanted to stop at the club on the way home from work and have a beer, that's fine. As long as it came out of his $20 and I wasn't going to say anything.
I love it. Yeah, I think that's important. It gives you a feeling of freedom, and you're not feeling so stifled, I think, because that doesn't really work long term. It doesn't for me.
It doesn't work long term for anybody.
Yeah.
There's only so much you can be unless you're particularly, there's a certain mindset.
Very disciplined. That is my husband.
Very disciplined person.
Yeah. Yes. Absolutely. Well, Corey had another question, and I don't know how different this will be than some of the other things you've talked about, but she asked, what is the best way to save for a house while living on post?
Good question. I really like living on post for several reasons. First of all, you're not paying the maintenance expenses and you don't have utility bills. So your budget can be a little bit more fixed than somebody who lives off post. Also, frequently, you can really decrease your transportation expenses.
Right.
Maybe you can even just have one car, which if you can manage that will help you save a ton of money. And again, not forever. We're not going to try to be a one car family for the next 50 years. But maybe you're in a place where it makes sense to be a one car family for that 1 year. Or we had one duty station. We had two cars and one of our cars broke down and we knew we were going to PCS in about a year. And we said, you know what, for a year, we can buckle down and make this work. And we could. We did it for a year. A really key thing with that, though, is to figure out how you're going to segregate that money. Allotments still exist and are actually really powerful tools. Maybe set up an allotment once you've looked at your budget and you think, we could put $1,000 a month into a savings account. Don't even let it come into your sphere. Set open a separate account at a different bank or credit union. It's just a little difficult to get to.
Yes.
Or if you don't like the allotment route, which is fine, set up an automatic transfer on the 1st and the 15th of the month to have that money go as soon as you get paid. It goes out into that special savings account.
That's
for
great
some
advice.
people, that is the only way it will work is if they literally sometimes have to drive to the other bank or credit union.
Yeah.
Some people have to make it harder than others.
Well, and honestly, this is not the exact same thing, but when I got pregnant with our first child and we knew that we wanted me to stay home and excuse me, we were like, we have to figure out a way we're going to have to get along without my salary, which was more than what my husband was making at the time because I was working as a registered nurse and he was active duty. And so from the time we found out until we had him, until I stopped working, my entire paycheck went into savings. And I don't know why my husband just has a natural sense of financial things. He just is very good at it. And he said, if we can't make it on what I'm making while we do this, then we know that you really can't stop working. Like we're going to have to figure out something else. And so I was so motivated. So all of my paychecks, I knew it was there. It drove me crazy, but it just went straight into savings that whole 8 months or whatever. And then we figured out, yes, we can survive. It's not as fun, but we could make it. And then we had all that money as an emergency fund for after we had the baby, which we did need. So same kind of thing. I think it's really a good point, Kate, of get it where you really are not going to touch it if you're committed to that and make it difficult to get to. I think those are absolutely great tips.
I think you said two super important things there too. One of them is I encourage all families, military or not, to try to finagle or whatever a way to build a budget around one income. Maybe you do have two incomes, and I'm not saying don't spend that second income, but keep that second income in a way that it gets used for non-essential things. So we always lived off my husband's income, and when I went back to work, that became our travel money. It became college funding money.
Yes.
It became the down payment on the house that I'm currently sitting in. But we always lived off of my husband's income. We could always pay our bills off of just one income. The other thing you said that I think is super important is practicing a way of managing your money to see if you can actually do it. I encourage people to do this when they come to me and they say, I want to buy a car. I'm like, okay, well, how much is that going to cost? Do you have the money? Are you going to have to take out a loan? Unless it's the person who just got transferred to Fort Bragg and needs a car yesterday. Okay, let's say your car payment is going to be $400 a month. For the next 6 months, can you take $400 out of your budget and put it in a savings account? If you can do that for 6 months and you don't have any problems, then you're ready to take on a $400 a month car payment.
Right.
But if you at some point in that 6 months are in deep trouble, or you need to go raid that savings account because you can't make ends meet, then you can't afford a $400 a month car payment.
Right.
And as a bonus, now you've got $2,400 in your savings account that could be your car's emergency fund. It could be a down payment, all sorts of choices.
And a lot of it is just living beneath your means. Like, don't have that champagne taste on a beer budget. Like go below that so that if something happens, you can still survive. And like you, when Steve got out of the military, my Steve, we got our house based on what he made with the VA and his retirement. We didn't really factor in what I make or his future job. Actually, we factored in what I make, but not his potential future job because he hadn't gotten one yet. And so it seemed a little crazy to me, like, well, we could afford way more house than this. But I think it was smart because if something happens where he leaves that job or I lose my job, we can still make our house payment. And I think that's hard to do in this society, is to live a little beneath your means. It's so easy to go way overshoot.
It is, and particularly with housing, housing is expensive. It just is.
Yes.
And we are, as a society, paying a larger portion of our monthly income for housing than people did in the past. So it's hard.
Yeah. Well, we had a couple of listeners ask about ideas for saving money, and I feel like we've covered that pretty thoroughly. So I'm going to skip on to a question from Tara at Tara House on Instagram. And she asked an interesting question to me because I had never thought of this one. And she said, when does it make sense to consider a trust for grown children?
I'll tell you what, she really threw me with that one. Trusts are complicated. No situation is the same. And there are, I don't know how to count, and I'm prone to hyperbole, bajillion kinds of trusts out there, right? There's revocable trusts, irrevocable trusts, living trusts, testamentary, almost any collection of letters that you could put together that makes a word, grats, gruts, grits, grunts. There's a trust out there that exists to do almost any job. You might need a trust, you may not. You really absolutely have to talk to a professional to determine whether or not a trust is something that makes sense for you, unless you have a disabled adult child or a disabled child who is still a child who will hopefully someday be an adult child. If you're disabled,
and I know her, and she does have a disabled adult child, so I'm sure that's where this question is coming from.
Yes. If you have a disabled adult child who may possibly ever, under any conceivable circumstance, receive government benefits of any kind, you need to have special needs trust or trusts. There are two different kinds of special needs trusts. We have a disabled adult child. We have both types of special needs trusts for her. Special needs trusts will protect your child's eligibility for state or federal government benefits, even if they receive an inheritance, if they receive a payout, say from a car accident type lawsuit, or if they are the beneficiary of survivor benefit plan benefits. You don't actually, typically in most cases, people are not going to want to fund those trusts because trusts get taxed at same rates, but compressed chart, basically higher rates than having money in them. But if you don't set up the trusts, it's kind of sometimes too late to set up the trusts later. So when we set up our whole estate plan, we created these two special needs trusts for our adult child. Hopefully she'll be completely self-sufficient and never need them, but her assets will be protected if she does need them.
Oh, that makes sense. Well, you are like a font of really good information. And I know we could talk for another hour, and I definitely would love to have you back to talk about some of the other topics that people ask about, especially like the survivor benefits plan, because we're not even going to get into that. That's a whole hour at least. And I know that you have a lot of amazing articles and resources on your site at katehorrell.com. So if listeners, if you have questions about any of these topics or others, I am certain that Kate has it covered or has written about it somewhere.
And if I haven't, send me an email and I'll write about it.
Yes, for sure. And thank you, Kate, so much. I just want to give you an opportunity before we close. Is there anything we didn't touch on that you want to make sure and mention this time, or any last tips you want to share?
My last tip is to just really take the time to learn about money. None of us are born being smart about money. Most of us did not have a family situation. Even if our parents were great with money, they maybe didn't explain every single thing they were doing along the way. So there's always room for education, and with the internet, you don't even have to leave your house. You don't have to go buy books or read the Navy Times to read a little blurb about some benefit. It's all out there. The Department of Defense has put a ton of money into this. The Office of Financial Readiness has a great website. You've got personal financial counselors on your base, Military One Source, people like me who just write about this because they really love it. Everything you could need to know is out there somewhere. So if you have a question, like, don't be shy, go Google it. And if you don't find the answer, go to DuckDuckGo and try it there.
Yeah.
Because the information is available.
Yeah. And if you were like me as a young spouse and I really just didn't know anything beyond like a checking and savings account back in the day, I didn't understand about mutual funds or any of those other things, 401ks. It was not in my purview at all. And if I can learn it, anybody can, because I was not a natural saver otherwise as well. I mean, I like, if it's there, I like to spend it. And so I had to learn to change my ways over the years. So make sure, guys, connect with Kate at her site, katehorrell.com. And don't forget, you can grab her everything you need binder there, as well as find her on all the socials. And we'll link to that. You can find Kate and keep up with her latest tips, advice, and resources that she's giving. So Kate, thank you so much for joining me today. It was just a pleasure to have you on.
Don't forget the giveaway.
Yes. And don't forget the giveaway on Instagram. And be looking for that. That is a great giveaway.
Thank you so much, Jen.
It was great talking to you, and we will for sure have you back. And listeners, remember, have a wonderful week, and you are brave, you are strong, and you have got this, whatever military life is throwing you. And I'll talk to you next time. Thanks for listening to the MilSpouse Matters podcast. Connect with me at milspousematters.com or on social media as @MilSpouseMatters. You can find my book, You Are Not Alone, Encouragement for the Heart of a Military Spouse, on Amazon and other booksellers. Love the show? Please leave a 5-star review in whatever podcast player you're listening, and then share it with someone else who could use it too. Until next time, have a great week.